Hello and welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. Today is part 2 of my series of 4 points of Black division, or areas of our lives that I believe promotes our division, Black people's division. I'm talking about locally and worldwide, locally and globally. So today I want to deal with, I call it cultural division or cultural racism, because culturally we are divided on purpose. We've been divided. And the two primary components of that division are religion and language. Now, let me be very clear. I'm not going to attack or dissect any particular religion. That's not my goal, because that's your belief, whatever it is. But I do want to examine the concept of religion and language as they work out in the world. Okay? I want you to watch a very short piece here about our personalities. Well, let me put it like this. First of all, let's try to define culture in some broad terms. um, Culture refers to the knowledge, experience, the beliefs, the values, the attitudes, the meanings of things, the hierarchies, religion, notions of time, roles, spatial relations, concepts of the universe, material objects and possessions acquired by a group of people in the course of generations through individual and group striving. Culture is the knowledge shared by a group of people. Now, that's a lot to take in, but culture is very, very huge. So I want you to watch this short piece about uh, culture and our personalities, because everything that what we do, what we say, what we believe and how we believe and how we came to believe those things are all part of our cultures.
Personality is more than just genes. A large part of who we are and the decisions that we make are influenced by the culture that we grew up in. So where does this influence start? Think all the way back to when you learned manners. You were probably scolded for engaging in behavior that was considered rude in your culture. Conversely, you were probably encouraged to engage in behaviors that are considered to be polite. Now, as you were conditioned to engage in more polite behaviors, you subconsciously picked up on patterns that influenced how you behave. These patterns are highly influenced by the values of the culture that you grew up in. But not all cultures hold the same values. Some cultures tend to encourage behaviors that are loud, boisterous, and competitive. Others encourage quiet, respectful, and more humble behaviors. Depending on the culture where you live, you probably picked up on these values, and they have definitely influenced your decisions and your personality. Researchers have been studying the connections between culture and personality for a long time, and in this video I'm going to attempt to explain two spectrums that researchers have created to define cultures. The culture's place on these spectrums highly influences the personality traits and the behaviors of the people within that culture. So culture is not determined by borders. As you'll see throughout the rest of this video, people learn lessons from cultures that are created from people within a certain country, occupation, class, gender identity, or other differences. For example, personality is more than just
Yeah, there was a misspelling there in that little piece there. It should have said quiet and respectful, but they misspelled it as quite. But in any case, I hope you got the gist of what he was saying. That essentially how our personalities are developed has to do with our cultures. And culture, again, I gave you a bunch of words, but let's talk about some things about culture is a way of life of a group of people. The behaviors, the beliefs, the values, and symbols that they accept, usually without even thinking much about them. We just think they're just there, that they got there by magic or something. But also that they're passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next. And culture is a collective programming of the mind that distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from another. The integrated pattern of human behavior that includes thought, speech, action, and artifacts depends upon the human capacity for learning and transmitting knowledge to succeeding generations. That's why some cultures are passed along very thoroughly, and others will die out. Um, the customs and the arts, social social institutions, and the achievements of a particular nation or people or other social group is all part of culture. Culture is about what activities we like, whether we are a participant or whether we are observers. Culture is how we earn a living, it's where and how each of us acquires food, clothing, shelter. It's about how people clean their clothes or get the water they drink. Culture is a learned behavior that's transmitted from one member of society to another. Now, why this is so important to understand to me is that if we go back mentally and think about our culture, if we could go back, say, 15 generations. No, let's go back further than that. Let's go back 20 generations. And we, meaning us that are listening and watching this, if we're black, for an example, what was our lives like 20 generations ago, 30 generations ago? Um, we don't have any idea. We really don't. Okay? Some groups of people do have ideas of what their cultures were like 20 and 30 generations, 40 generations. Some weren't even around 40 generations ago, right? Um, but the idea about our culture is so personal, so important because of this. If I do something, if I take you as a child, for an example, and I put you in a room with nothing but blank walls, and I don't teach you how to speak your mother tongue, but instead I talk to you in my tongue, my mother tongue, and it's different from yours. And I don't give you your education that your group, your nation, or whatever their education would be, but instead I read to you out of books of mine, of my history, of my culture. What's going to be the result for you? You will have my mind. You will have my history. You will have my emotions. You will have my culture. You will not have your native culture. You'll have mine. This is the most challenging part of why we are in the state that we're in, not just here in the United States, but all over the world. We don't have our native cultures. We have someone else's cultures. We have someone else's mind, and that has a lot to do with how we feel, think, and do things. Now, if the culture that we have been imprinted on our minds, what if it turns out to be a racist culture? A racist culture. What is cultural racism? Well, cultural racism, those aspects of society that overtly and covertly, that means outwardly and hidden, attribute value and normality to white people and whiteness, and devalue, stereotype, and label people of color as other, different than, or render them invisible. Now, I'm going to say this right now, and we'll see it again in some of these slides. I don't like that term people of color. And so I use black people when I'm talking about black people, and I'll say black and brown people. And in some cases, I will say non white. I don't use and don't like people of color because it's like the term minority. It slams us black people all up in the same groupings with brown people and yellow people and red people. And I don't like that because I don't, number one, it's not accurate. And it's, again, mm, it's one of those terms that they use, the white people use, to devalue us. The very same, it's an aspect of cultural racism. Okay? Now let's go in a little bit deeper. One of the things that has become like a thing with some white people, they call it color blindness. And right here it says, what is colorblind racism? Because that's an aspect of cultural racism. Okay? It asserts that color blindness, that what it says is that good white people don't see color and treat all people as individuals. First of all, that's a lie. And here's a good place for me to mention one of the things I like to mention, that you will find a lot of times white people, that's good white people and outwardly racist bad white people, they will use two words interchangeably. They'll use prejudice and racism interchangeably. Those are two totally different words, two totally different meanings, two totally different concepts. And one of the tricks is that when you hear a black person say, oh, we're all prejudiced, they will then turn around and say, well, that means that we're all racist. No, it's not. We may all have prejudices, Okay? Now, what does that mean? It means we prejudge people, we prejudge situations, we prejudge things. That's what prejudice is. It means prejudging. From people to people, what it can mean is that, oh, I don't like people that I perceive as being Asian because I've gone into what's supposed to be restaurants to get Chinese food, and they mistreated me or treated me crappy. So I don't like Asians. That's a prejudice. That's not a racism. That's a prejudice. Why is it prejudging? Because it assumes that all Asians are like the ones that I ran across in the Chinese food place. The problem with that is twofold. One is in many of the so-called Chinese food restaurants in black communities, those are not Chinese people in the first place. These are many times Koreans. Yeah. And secondly, by saying Asians, it minimizes the fact that don't, many Asians don't look like Chinese people. There's more than just Japanese and Chinese and Vietnamese and Taiwanese and you got a whole, and we'll look at this in a few minutes. There's a whole group of basically white people who are Asians. India is Asian. That's an Asian nation. You see? So the idea that we have prejudices, we all do. They're different kinds. But we are not racist. And the idea of color blindness, it basically says, I don't see you. See, I'm very good looking. I'm very colorful. How can you be colorblind? When white people say, I don't see color. Well, what do you see when you look at me? What, am I invisible? Okay, and they also claim they treat all people as individuals. No, that's not true. Because these same white people, when they're on the elevator, especially a white woman, be on the elevator by herself, and a black man goes to get on the elevator, you'll see her clutch her purse. She might even get off that elevator right then and there. See it? See, and this is why I'm the way I am. If I'm standing up waiting for an elevator and the elevator door opens, there's one white woman in there, I'm not getting on the elevator. I do not ride in an elevator with one white woman. Now, that's a prejudice. It says that I don't feel safe getting on an elevator with a lone white woman. Okay? It's self protective because I know that if she, out of her own prejudices and fear, uh, if she accused me of anything, it's a white woman's word against mine. Who do you think they're gonna believe? So I don't put myself in a situation at all. Okay. Again, what is cultural racism? It relies on culturally based arguments such as Mexicans do not put much emphasis on education. We've heard that. We've heard that. Uh, and we've heard worse ones like Mexicans don't get no car insurance, or like uh, 1,000 Mexicans live in a two-room apartment. All kinds of stuff. Oh, I know some that, in terms of business and stuff in particular. Oh yeah, you want to get some work done on your house or in your building? Yeah, get some Mexicans because they work all day. They work hard and they don't take no breaks. And you can get them real cheap. Hey, I'm just telling you the kind of stuff, the kinds of prejudices. Now, when they work up to be like that, culturally based arguments are like the one about blacks have too many babies. And that's one of the things that some people will claim is why black people are so far behind in society. Well, black people have too many babies. Excuse me? How is that? How does that explain the standing of minorities in the society? Well, it goes on to say, well, because black people have so many babies and they can't take care of them, then those babies grow up to be messed up. Okay? Bold biological claims regarding race and racism have been replaced by cultural claims that serve to explain lack of achievement in regard to the educational and socioeconomic mobility of oppressed groups. So, yeah, Mexicans don't really achieve much uh, in the society because they don't place much emphasis on education. Black people don't achieve very high mobility because they have too many babies. Okay? Those are culturally based arguments that are reflective of cultural racism. Now, I'm going to show you how it really gets vicious. Okay? Um, you may remember this. This was an issue of Vogue that had LeBron James on the cover. As soon as I saw that, as soon as I saw it, I knew exactly what they were trophying. They were trophying King Kong. Now, when you see this right here, now it's in Great Britain. That's an aspect of cultural racism because we can see that as totally normal. It's all right to stop and frisk. That's stop and frisk in London. Now, these clothes that these people have on in that picture, I'll come back to it in a minute. But you see that King Kong? Now, and I attribute how they got LeBron to go for that is that he apparently was not aware of that trope, of the King Kong trope. That was, psych, hmm, it was meant to be seen as a black man, King Kong. Okay, that's what he was seen as, and he want a white woman. Okay, so destroy this mad brute, join the U.S. Army. Ain't that something? Uh, so they tricked LeBron into that and then put him on the cover of Vogue. Now you see that stop and frisk. What's interesting about it? All those police are white, or bobbies as they call them there, and they got nothing but brothers up against the wall. Those are not costumes. Those are people's clothes that reflect their culture. See, that's one of the things white people will do. They will take your clothing style that might reflect your religion or your culture or whatever, and then they make stuff up and wear it and say, oh, it's just a costume. That's why they love Halloween. Halloween means they can dress up in anybody's costumes. Okay? Now, why do I have the little boys? They're coming up in a minute. The little black boys. Well, can you tell instantly that they probably are African? What tells you that they might be African? Look at it when they come up. What tells you that they might be African? Okay? Could they also be Africans in America in a play or some kind of cultural um, event? Could they be celebrating Black History Month, perhaps? Hmm. You see, we don't know. But if we assume, oh, there must be some little African boys in Africa. You see, we don't know. Yeah, we don't know. Little boys and maybe little girls, I don't know. But we should not assume. We shouldn't let anybody else assume it either. All right, let's take this apart for a quick second here. Racism. Individual racism is, let's look at it this way. Individual racism. A student uses a racial slur against another student. Okay, that's an example of individual racism. Cultural racism. Black and Latino students are perceived to be more aggressive by teachers and administrators. And it becomes institutional racism. when Black and Latino students are suspended at higher rates than their white peers. You see, we have to understand individual, cultural, and institutional, um, and being very clear about it, because otherwise, this is what happens sometimes. A Black person or a brown person will be the victim of an individual instance of racism, but they will speak on it as if it's institutional. That the fact that say a white student called a Black student a racial slur, they'll say, well, that's institutional racism. That school is racist. Well, that example, though, is a bad example, because that's an example of individual racism. Okay. Uh, and then they miss out on being able to examine what are the rates of suspension at that school, at that institution, in terms of Black and brown students and white students. That's how you can determine that something may be institutionally racist. Okay, and you talk to the teachers and administrators. Do you when you're talking to the teachers and administrators, do they express things like that? Well, some of these Black kids, they're much too aggressive. They frighten me. Okay, that's cultural. It's cultural racism. All right. Now, I'm going to look at this for a second here. Examples of cultural racism. See, there's so much in the culture. For an example, holidays and celebrations. Thanksgiving and Christmas are acknowledged officially on calendars. So it's on a calendar, it must be official, right? Here's a deep word here. Traditional holiday meals, usually comprised of foods representing the dominant culture, have become the norm for everyone. And I said that's a special word. The word traditional is very dangerous, because whoever uses that term is saying this is the norm for normal people. Now, it may not be your tradition, but if I'm white and I'm running stuff and I make it traditional, then I have said that, hey, if you don't I'll give you a good example. What is the traditional holiday meal for Thanksgiving? In the United States, Thanksgiving holiday. Literally, it has to be a turkey or else it's non-traditional. Okay? All right. Um, now some people will have ham, and well, I think what is ham is many times traditional Christmas. But if we don't eat ham, if we don't eat pork in our household, number one, we're assumed to be Muslims, and that may not be true. But if we're out of the tradition, if we don't eat turkey on Thanksgiving and ham on Christmas, you see, that's coming out of the norm. And if you ask yourself, see, let me put it like this. I know Black people who believe so much that if they don't follow the tradition, if they don't have turkey on Thanksgiving, that somehow they're not American. Now, they're as American can be. But the idea in their heads, because this is what the way they've been programmed, they believe that you have to eat turkey on Thanksgiving. They have accepted that as the norm, that which is of the dominant culture. After what has it been, 40 years, 40 something years, Kwanzaa is actually practiced by a great many people, but a great many Black people. But what's weird is when you hear Black people who observe Kwanzaa will still say that, well, it's like a Black Christmas. and they still won't let Christmas go. They actually say, well, this allows us to have Christmas for the children so that the children have, grow up with Christmas, the traditional idea of Christmas. Why? Why? Holidays associated with non European cultures are given little attention in the United States culture. What do I mean by that? Do you know when the Chinese New Year is? Is it accepted and practiced by the full culture? No, it's only recognized as something that Chinese people do. Some, and you have some Chinese people, Chinese Americans, who don't, they don't deal with Chinese New Year. They only deal with the Christian New Year. Okay, and as I move to the next one, but before I go, I just want to mention this. Many times, because we don't know the origins of stuff, we just be doing it because this is what we've been taught to do or programmed to do. We don't even realize that they're based on Christianity. Okay? Based on Christianity. And we think it's something that's been blessed by God or something. I don't know. Okay, personal traits. Characteristics such as independence, assertiveness, and modesty are valued differently in different cultures. And I'll give you a good example of that I have in the graphics that I've been showing. You'll see them again. I purposely included some some graphics of Zulu people, and the graphics are of the of an engagement ceremony, and there's also a couple of graphics of Zulu young women in the reed ceremony. If you don't know what that is, then you should research it. But one of the things that's problematic for some black people in the United States is that it is quite a part of their culture that young women, especially virgins and unmarried, will participate in these events uh, with their breasts out, uncovered breasts. That's not seen as sexual because in their culture that's not a sexual thing. But it makes some black people so uncomfortable. Okay? Now, here's the thing that's so weird. These same kind of black folks that are uncomfortable with that, they don't see anything wrong with white people that have nude beaches. In fact, they'll go to certain places where they got nude beaches and then be bragging about how they went out there nude in the nude beach. Or what is it, San Tropez, where they like to sunbathe topless? They don't see nothing wrong with that. They don't feel that's uncomfortable. All right. Or they might go to Carnival in Rio de Janeiro, where the women almost, in some cases, are naked. But these are differences in cultures and who dominates. If the white man says okay, oh, I'm fine with it. The white man says, oh, that's heathen. Those women with their breast out, that's heathen. Then I'm uncomfortable with it. Language. Standard English usage is expected in most institutions in the United States. Other languages are sometimes expressly prohibited or tacitly disapproved of. And we've seen more of that since the Trump got into the presidency because he's gone so hard about foreigners, especially Mexicans. And we've seen instances around the country where police personnel have harassed people, and even sometimes not even police personnel, just white people, have harassed people speaking Spanish or that they perceive as being foreigners from, whether they from Guatemala or Peru or whatever, they just, oh, they Mexicans. That kind of ignorance. Standards of dress. If a student or faculty member dresses in clothing or hairstyles unique to their culture, they are described as being ethnic, whereas the clothing or hairstyles of Europeans are viewed as normal. We've had a breakout of this in the last couple of years about our hair, both male and female. The idea that if we wear braids or whatever it is that white people don't like, all of a sudden that's a problem, especially for our young people in schools. And that's, it was so funny. I was talking to some young people not too long ago. They thought this was brand new. I said, no, it's not brand new. We went through the same thing in the 60s. Okay, when we first started wearing our fros, as we call them, afros or naturals. Oh yeah, you see, our hair has always been political. It's always been political. It's not a style. It's a political expression. And there's a fear that when we wear our hair certain ways, it engenders a fear in some white people. They're afraid of it. They see it as too militant. But even further back, real quick, it goes back further than the 60s. The reason why we would press our hair, men would get what they used to call a process, and black women would press their hair. In fact, we got a movie coming out about Madam C.J. Walker, who produced products in order to make it easier for black women to press their hair. You have to understand, black men, if they worked as Pullman porters, they better not be trying to come to work with no braids or no naturals. They better have their hair processed because they were basically serving white men. Black women, if they were domestics, which was the counterpart to the Pullman porters, the biggest area of employment for black women during certain periods of time after slavery was being domestics. White women who hired a black woman to come into her house and cook and clean and wash and all of that. She couldn't come up there with no natural. She definitely couldn't come up there with no braids. She had to press her hair. That's what white women demanded. And it has to do with, I think, with the idea of being subservient. If you're willing to do that, then you're willing to go along with what I tell you. And so that's what Madam C.J. Walker did. She simply made it easier for black women to press their hair. Standards of beauty: eye color, hair texture, body size, and shape ideals exclude most black people. For instance, black women who have won the Miss America beauty pageant have closely approximated white European looks. That's beginning to change in some. I shouldn't say it's beginning to change. We've seen some exceptions to that. In fact, recently, this is the year 2020. This year, for the first time ever, the four major beauty pageants had black women as winners. And they were a variety of shades. In some cases they were darker, in some cases they were brown skin. I don't think, well, it might have been one of them was what we call light skin, but it was the idea that they were all black women. Okay, we talking about Miss World, Miss Universe, Miss America, Miss Teenage America. It was like amazing, and we said almost in all of us together said, "Uh-oh, they're gonna change the rules after this." Cultural icons: Jesus, Mary, Santa Claus, for example, are portrayed as white. The devil and Judas Iscariot, however, are often portrayed as black. In fact, there was a famous incident with some woman. She was a commentator on Fox News. She said that not too long ago. Santa Claus is white. Y'all can't make a black Santa Claus. Santa Claus is white. Boy, she didn't sound ignorant. All right, I want you to watch this real quick, and we'll move on quickly in terms of cultural racism. This is an example of what I consider to be American culture as expressed by these people.
African American towns that were established. Some suggest upwards of 50 African American towns between 1924 and 1928. Reverend S.S. Jones was going around documenting this sort of self-determined, vibrant African American communities. You see the African American educators, doctors, lawyers, landowners, oil barons, and I think that's what's so remarkable about this footage. To think that individuals, how many years out of slavery, are now owning oil wells that are producing 2,000 barrels a day. African American towns.
Now, before I move on, I just want to mention that I did that on purpose. I showed you some footage of black folks in the United States, and then I showed you some footage of some Africans in South Africa and Zulu people, and they were doing a ceremony. Um, you see, this is how well we've been programmed that some of us would feel uncomfortable with the Africans, but they don't feel uncomfortable. Well, and then again, we got some that would feel uncomfortable with the footage I showed of the Black Americans because they were well, they weren't sophisticated. You see, our prejudices, but they were both black folks, okay, and they were both practicing the cultures in which they found themselves in. They were born into. So those of us that like to criticize Africans who, in their culture, it's all right to have girls with their breast out, you know. And I've been lectured about that at different times. That anytime we do a presentation that includes that, I've had some black women say, "Well, you really shouldn't do that because that's not civilized." Excuse me. And I say, according to whose civilization? You see? And here's the worst one. When I have a black woman say, "Well, that just encourages rape." I say, "No, it does not. No, it doesn't. Rape is a crime of power, and all the black women that were raped over hundreds of years here in the United States and other places in the world where there were white men, they would rape black women at will. It didn't matter what they were wearing. Okay? Now, before I move on to the next level, hopefully you got enough out of understanding about cultural racism. But let me do this. Uh, Let me go back here for a minute because I want to make sure that you have a good understanding of cultural racism. Cultural racism is how the dominant culture is founded upon and then shapes norms, values, beliefs, and standards to advantage white people and oppress non-white people. That's what cultural racism is. Um, Cultural racism is how the dominant culture defines reality to advantage white people and oppress non-white people. That's why when we see stuff, we know that this ain't right. Cultural racism uses cultural differences to overtly and covertly assign value and normality to white people and whiteness in order to rationalize the unequal status and degrading treatment of non white people and non white communities. Now, what is white supremacy culture? White supremacy culture is the idea that white people and the ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions of white people, are superior to non white people and their ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions. And it goes without saying, but I have to say it because we see it all the time. It's white supremacy culture is an artificial, historically constructed culture which expresses, justifies, and binds together the United States white supremacy system into the global white supremacy system. White supremacy culture is reproduced by all the institutions of our society, in particular the media, the educational system, Western science, that plays a major role in the idea of race as a biological truth, and of course the hierarchy of racism that white should always be at the top, and the Christian church, which has played a central role in reproducing the idea of white supremacy, that white is normal, better, smarter, holy, in contrast to black and other white, non-white people and non-white communities. That's just reality, y'all. That's the truth. Okay? Um, and because of that, we are so divided because of the cultures. We can barely understand it. Now, let me move quickly through religion because I got religion, and now that we have an understanding about culture, all right, we got religion and language. All right, religion. Again, I'm not attacking any particular religion. Religion is a particular system of faith and worship. The major religions in the world, what are they? Most of us, see, we don't pay much attention to religions outside of the one we may believe in. But let's look at this real quick. Now, this is from the CIA World Fact Book in 2010. World religions by percentage: 33% in the world Christians, 21% Muslims, non religious 14%. That's a high percentage, ain't it? Hindus, 13%. Wow. Buddhists, 5%, almost 6%. And other religions, 12.8, almost 13%. Okay, let's break it down even further. All right, let's look at this. I'm gonna pull this up so I can see it closer. Uh, this is looking at Europe. You see Russia up here, all the pink, reddish, whatever. Orthodox Christianity in Russia. Okay, but right there in the center, that's green. That's Muslim. Okay, Tibetan Buddhism. Okay, and down there you see the green, the Sunni Muslims and the Shia Muslims. Right. All right. Now you move over here to the blue, Catholic Christianity. Now that's Spain and France, Poland and Hungary, and Czech Republic and Luxembourg, Belgium, all of that. Vatican City, of course, that's Catholic. Portugal, okay, and then the purple is Protestant Christianity. That includes the United Kingdom and Germany, Protestant, Finland, Sweden, all of that up in there. Okay, Major religions of the world, uh, ranked by the number of adherents. See, this is why it's important for us to understand this, because we think that we are the, you know, part of the biggest. And I'm talking about black people. Okay, it's black people in the United States, as a matter of fact. Christianity 2 billion, Islam 1.3 billion, Hinduism 900 million, secular non-religious agnostic atheists 850 million, Buddhism 360 million, Chinese traditional religion 225 million, African traditional and diasporic 95 million, Sikhism 23 million, Judaism 14 million, Jainism 4 million, and Shinto 4 million. Okay? See where we at in this deal? We ain't as big as we thought are. Major branches of world religions, number of adherents worldwide. You see that? Again, African indigenous. Yeah, they give us small numbers. Uh, but we're in there. But you see, the world is not all Christian and Muslim. That's what the United States media tries to give us this idea, is that there's only two religions in the world, well, three. That half the world is Christian, and a third of the world is Muslim, and then another third of the world is Jewish. That's not even true. That's not near true. There's actually very few Jewish, and the Muslims keep growing, even though they debate about, between the Shiites and the different sects of Judaism. All right, but let's look at the United States real quick. Uh, Leading church bodies, and I want you to look at this real quick because it's important. Look at all that red. All that red down there, that's Baptists. The Baptists and all throughout the South, right? Then you got all this blue all around the country. That's Catholic. Then you have the Christians, and that's the yellow, little pockets of the Christians. When I say Christians, those are those Christians that you got to watch out for. The ones that love to talk about how much they love the present resident. But now look at this next one. It's kind of like tan Latter-day Saints. Look over here to the left. You see all of that out there in Utah and stuff. Those are Mormons. See, you can't play the Mormons, to the left. The Mormons are out there. They own Utah. All right. It's called the Church of Latter-day Saints. If you don't know much about them, you should check it out because they also are that group. They own the largest collection of DNA and genealogy information in the world. Yeah. And you got the green, those are the Methodists. You got the light blue, those are reformed religions like Reformed Jews, etc. And then you got the others. All right. But you see how the United States is broken down? And so you can't ignore this when you look at how in this country the politics is played. Okay? The politics of religion. They play them against each other. And it keeps us definitely, black people, it keeps us divided because we argue with each other over religion. That's why I never argue with people about religion. But you got the Catholics and you got the Methodists and you got the Baptists and you got the Lutherans and you got the this and the that, Episcopalians and all of that. And black people, we are all these different religions and we argue for whatever our religion is. We'll take our position on our religion over our own people. Okay? That's a division. That was on purpose. They made sure of it. Now, last but not least, languages. let's look at this for a second because, see, the fact that we are separated by languages, and this is deep. Understand this. There are approximately 6,900 languages known on Earth. Many of these are considered various variations of each language, and some are only known to a few people or by a few people. Geographically, English is geographically the most widespread language on Earth and is second only to Chinese in the number of people who speak it. All right? Uh, the most widely spoken language on Earth is Mandarin, which is spoken as a first language by nearly a billion people. Uh, let's do this. Okay, real quick. Languages of the world. Look at North America. Okay, 70% speak English, but check this out: Spanish 9%, French 3%, Chinese 1%, others 17%. Spanish is actually higher than that, but we'll go with this for right now because there's some so-called Americans who believe that anybody who speaks Spanish shouldn't be considered an American. That's stupid because so much of what we call the United States used to be Mexican. All right, but look at Europe. uh, 22% of Europeans speak Russian and 12% speak German. But let's do this way. The 13 languages that you to speak to half the world: Mandarin, which is a billion people; Spanish, 460 million people. See, there's actually more people in the world that speak Spanish than English. We're talking about for first languages, right? Number three is English, 379 million. But now here's the thing about English. That's as a first language is English for 379 million. But there's another 700 million people in the world who speak English as a second language. Okay? And because of that, it makes English be the most widespread language on earth. Then you have Hindi, uh, and then Arabic, Portuguese, Bengali of all things, Russian, Japanese, Punjabi, German, Japanese, and Wu. I didn't even know what Wu was. So the most spoken language in the world is Mandarin. Spanish, the primary language of most of the South and Central American countries like Spain, Central America, and Spain, and a large part of the United States. Okay? 379 million first tongue English speakers, 750 million people who speak it as a second language. Hindi, spoken mainly in northern India and parts of Pakistan. Portuguese is spoken by 220 million native speakers in countries like Brazil, Goa, Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Sao Tome and Principe, and Macau. And then you have Bengali, which is spoken by 130 million Bengalese or Bangladeshis, which is Bangladesh. You know that, did you? Yeah. See, the languages is deep because the language keeps us even further apart. And one of the coldest things is this: if we just spoke two languages besides English, I mean, fluent in two other languages besides English, we would be so much further ahead because the fact that we are trapped in English and think we're doing good to just be, proud to be able to, we speak English. Not understanding about the English language and how small it is in the world, how limiting it is in thinking. That if we knew what we were missing in terms of just speaking one or even two other languages, we'd be able to think our way out of this stuff. Trust me. When you look at Africa, look at this. You have all these different languages, right? When I went to Senegal some years back, one of the things that really, really got to me was how little children could speak more than one language. And it really knocked my socks off. Now, real quick, I want to mention this about German. The most widely used mother tongue in the European Union is German. We have to understand Germany is the largest population in Europe, and it's also the largest ethnic European ethnic group in the United States, especially in Pennsylvania. You'd be amazed at how many Germans are in Pennsylvania and how many of them know German. Okay, German is the second language most commonly used in scientific terms. Wow. Four European Union member countries use German as their official language: Austria, Belgium, Germany, and Luxembourg. Fields where German is the dominant language: theology, philosophy, literature, history, culture, and business. German is recognized as a minority language in Venezuela, Vatican City, South Africa, Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Russia, and Romania. You see? So we have to get past this point of thinking that for some reason we have some kind of I don't know how we might be so we're arrogant. We believe that we are the center of the world, but we are just beginning to understand. If we, or maybe we don't, but if we were to begin to understand how, by becoming more bilingual and to learn how to talk to each other and work with each other in spite of whatever our religions may be, wow, we will be able to go so much further, because religion and language keeps us divided more than we understand, because that's the cultures. You want to understand the culture you're in? Look at the language. Look at the history of the language and where it comes from, and you will know where you come from. It might not be real, but it's what you believe, because it's been implanted in you by the language you speak. That's why there's 2.5 times more black people in Brazil and than here, and yet we communicate with them very little because they speak Portuguese and we speak English, and we think that we don't need to learn how to speak Portuguese, or we don't even need to understand the history. How did that little tiny country of Portugal get to command a colony that's so huge it's got 2.5 times more black people who speak Portuguese in Brazil? Look at that on a map sometime and ask yourself, how did they do that? That was some serious colonization. All right. Thank you for your attention today. And Melanated, appreciate you. And of course, ABJ over there, ABJ Jones, appreciate you, sister. And all the others. All right. I will see you with part 3 next week. Good Lord willing, the creek don't rise. Until then, I tell you what, no justice, no peace, no love. KNOW.